Hello and welcome to the series Mysteries of the Universe. This is John DeSalvo, and my two co-hosts are Dr. Hurtak and Dr. Desiree Hurtak. And we have one heck of a special guest today. And I want to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Rasher, who is an icon in the field of theoretical physics, paranormal studies, remote viewing, and I tell you, it's such an honor. When I heard that the Hurtaks knew you and were going to invite you as a guest, I can't tell you how excited I was. So again, thank you, Dr. Rasher, for joining us. And I'd like to give just a quick intro to Dr. Rasher because we have a lot of new listeners and people may not know her incredible accomplishments, but she has a PhD in physics, was professor at the University of Nevada. She worked at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a consultant for NASA. I could go on and on. She has numerous peer-reviewed journal publications and best-selling books. My favorite is the Holographic and Anthropic Universe, which she wrote. Just amazing. And she also was featured in the book How the Hippies Saved Physics. I haven't read that one, but I was a hippie, so I can't wait to get a copy of that. And the thing, I got to also find out how she built her first telescope as a kid, because I did also. So I just have so much in common with her. And she describes herself as an open-minded skeptic, which I love, and I think that is what we need in this area of research. So I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Rauscher, and maybe turn it over to JJ for any more of an introduction that I may have missed.
Right, and it gives us great pleasure to introduce our beloved colleague, Elizabeth Rasher. Besides all of her academic work, she has published over 450 scientific papers. She has spoken at the United Nations as a special consultant. She has worked behind and in the front of parapsychology for many, many years, including with Russell Targ and Harold Pudoff at Stanford Research Institute that did the great work in the 1970s that showed clearly that remote viewing does work. It's a scientific reality. And we've just published this book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time. And we like to use this as a touchstone for our conversation today of the new physics of consciousness, why we need to break out of the box, and we need to go beyond classical physics that tells us to shut up and simply calculate. We know the power of the mind is at work, and we know that this brings us new insights to a positive future. Our world is now being assaulted from many directions by negative thoughts and old models of science, and we need to change that. And Elizabeth, you're here to help us with this. So for starters, let's talk about the importance of this book, Mind Dynamics, and why we put this out as a textbook for the world to use.
Well, I want to say this. From a little child, about 4 years old, I was sitting on the stoop of our back porch, and I was thinking, I'm not satisfied with my life. I've got to study the meaning of what's going on. What's the purpose of life? Why are we born? And why do we exist? And why might we die? See, I do a caveat on that one, especially getting older. Anyway, so I have pursued absolute truth and knowledge all my life, and I suspect I'm not going to find it. But there is a lot of truths that exist. There's 4 categories. There's known reality and truth that is probably reasonably valid, or we couldn't build all this electronics. There's things that are accepted that, unfortunately, there's a lot of them that are wrong. Like dominion over nature doesn't mean conquering nature. It means the caregiver of nature and our environmental issues. And this is what I was a delegate to the UN on. Then there's unaccepted truths, and there's many of those, and there's a whole unknown sea of knowledge to be gained. And it's fantastic, because if we know everything, and whenever one says they know everything, they're in for a rude awakening. Like at the turn of the last century, it was said we should close the patent offices because everything is known. Oh my gosh, relativity and quantum mechanics came live. And then there's unaccepted truths or unaccepted information that, by the way, is pretty weird, pretty phony. And what I do with things that I don't know about is I call shelving it. I don't make a judgment whether something is true or false without a great deal of evidence. And being a nearsighted youngster, I built 6 telescopes between 9 and 13.
Wow.
And my biggest was a 3.5-inch reflector. Of course, I didn't have all 6 at once because I took them apart to build better ones. But it's interesting. There was a system whereby I could buy stuff called Edmunds Scientific.
Yes!
Ah!
Yes.
Yeah.
That's where I got my first telescope.
What I did is I was too poor to buy one, so I had to build them. And I buy assorted lenses, and there'd be a whole box of lenses, some broken. And then I'd have to measure their wavelength and their curvature. And I had a blast. And my parents were very busy social people, so they go out and leave me home alone. And that's when I could do science. And I'm probably the only one in the history of either my mom's or dad's family that was into science. My mom liked science, and my dad hated it. So I had to go into it. It's just, forcing function. And so I found that the basis in physical science was a good grounding for studying truth and knowledge. And what I'll put in here, a word that's not used in the scientific community. In fact, 2 words: consciousness and spirituality. When I was at Lawrence Berkeley, the word consciousness, my God, some of the physicists would walk across the hall to avoid me when I said that word, and now they're writing about it. So the revolution is on, because if you don't incorporate the doer of science, the thinker of science, called consciousness, you don't understand science.
Elizabeth, you are also the founder of the Fundamental Fysiks Group. Was this at Berkeley? And tell us a little bit about why you founded it and what it did.
Shut up and think is what I got in my sophomore quantum mechanics book. When I asked, what's the meaning of quantum mechanics? What does this all mean? What about the Einstein-Bohr debates, where Einstein wanted a deterministic universe where every particle is known, every law of physics, and the whole future was determined. And Bohr, the Bohr atom, said, I can live with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and so I will consider that maybe we don't know everything until it's measured.
The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for all of those who may be unfamiliar with the term, reflects
the probability of where anything is in the universe, which is really interesting. So not to be able to pinpoint everything if things are a wave, right?
And of course, Elizabeth had on her PhD committee the famous Glenn Seaborg, and 2 atomic particles are named after him. And so she was thrust in the midst of the best minds in particle physics, in astrophysics, in nuclear physics. She was really the only female voice there that was pushing the envelope. And we must give her credit, because all of you out there, particularly the female side of our worldwide fellowship, has to understand this is the age of the feminine side of science, exemplified in consciousness.
But let's go back to the Fundamental Fysiks Group for just a minute, because this is what's behind the book, The Hippies Save Physics.
Well, first of all, I think there's science. It doesn't depend whether it's a female or male that does it. It is picking the best tomato at the grocery store, examining the details of the truth. So how the Hippies Save Physics came out of my sophomore quantum mechanics course, where I said, what's the meaning of this? And they said, shut up and calculate. And so I got together with a group of people. George Weissman was working down the hall in the theoretical physics group. where I was working at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And then I just met a whole bunch of people online. It was before online, but it was by phone. And so they all came together, and we ended up with 40 people meeting once a week in E.O. Lawrence's old office and discussing the foundations of quantum mechanics, how quantum physics and relativity fit together, unified field theory ideas, and exploring really the foundations of the meaning and interpretation and the philosophical implications of physics. And it was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful group and very exciting. And Henry Stapp, who kind of winced when I mentioned consciousness in the old days, has written books on it now. And Jeff Chu came and spoke to our group, and he was head of that physics department. And then we had people like David Bohm and Eugene Wigner and John Wheeler, who came on board. And so the book, How the Hippies Say Physics, with David Kaiser, came out in 2011. And I had to decide, was I truly a hippie or not? Because actually I grew up in a conservative family, so I think I was a conservative at the time, or a horrible radical, a person being a poet being a radical. But now I'm considered, even in this day and age, I'm still a radical. So it's very interesting. But anyway, it was, before World War II, the philosophy, the idea behind the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and how quantum measurement determines the state of a quantum system or a microsystem. All this was discussed in the DeSalvo conferences, but after World War II, it really was shut up and calculate. And so that door had to be opened, because I see no reason in studying anything without understanding what it has to say about our meaning of life, our philosophy, our concepts of reality, not only for ourselves, but I've taught for many years. What do we teach? We never teach. We allow people to learn, to open, to be in touch with their own being, to be in touch with who they really are in all dimensions. So the quantum world says we're all non-locally connected, since the formulation of John Bell in 1964 and its theoretical and experimental tests in 71 by John Clauser, who was part of the Fundamental Fysiks Group. And so we're on a path of reopening the door to exploring who we really are, what our potentials are, and what our responsibilities are.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what I like so much about your research, your background. You are really approaching this in a multidisciplinary way, not only just science multidisciplinary, but parapsychology. You're trying to me, unify all of these disciplines. And maybe we won't see the real truth in our lifetime, but at least we can try to lay the foundations for it for future generations. So I admire you for your diversity in what you're doing.
Thank you. I'll give you an example. I was giving a talk on remote viewing after I discovered it was real. I had about 3 restless nights thinking, I can't go to the head of the lab and say, we're all psychic anyway. Figured I'd get fired, which I would have. But when I was Xeroxing a physics paper, a student came up and started banging on the copy machine. I thought he'd bust it before I get my article copied. So he was saying, but the main body of physics denies psychic phenomena. I thought, well, I've got to reconcile physics and consciousness. So I developed a theoretical model that is actually part of the standard model of physics that reconciles psi with the main body of physics and shows that New York and California, if I have a viewer in California and then a geographic target in New York, that they're contiguous in a complex H space. So it expands on our 4 space of X, Y, and Z and T. Minkowski space. So if I'm going to meet someone for pizza, I need to say where and when. That's 4 space. We live on a world line in 4 space, but we actually also live on a world line in 8 space. And so New York and California are no longer separate spatially, but in the 8-dimensional space, they're contiguous. So of course I can remote view New York. I just look at my metal screen and see New York, someplace in New York that somebody's at.
And it doesn't have to go 3,000 miles. It's the same connection directly.
Right. And this is the same, of course, with remote viewing, that her work with actually Russell Targ, who's one of the pioneers of remote viewing, said, it's not a matter of sending and receiving the signal. This is, I think, where she developed the 8th space concept, but the viewer was actually there right at that instant. He just moved his consciousness, and I wouldn't even say the word move. He had his consciousness in that other space and time reality. So how did he do that? If you can only do it this way, no, you do it through the 8 space reality, through what we would say complex 8 space. I think that's what you call it.
Hyperdimensional reality.
Yeah. Oh, Dr. Rasher, how does quantum entanglement tie into this? Do you think that's part of the solution too? Because that's an area of my interest.
Well, I'm just working on a series of papers right now on that very issue of reconciling local realism, which is what Einstein believed in, and the quantum probability. And I knew John Wheeler well, and he was a mentor of mine. And he said he believed in quantum participation, that is, that the person observing through instrumentation collapses the state of an unidentified quantum reality into one that's cognized. And so he said Monday, Wednesday, and Friday I believe in a participatory universe. And the other days of the week I don't know. But anyway, I'm writing a series of papers right now. And one of them, a major long paper with JJ and Desiree, on this very issue of reconciling local realism, which is what most people believe in, and the non-locality of consciousness and quantum events. So that's I'm having fun doing it.
So for the audience, let's talk about non-locality, because Henry Stapp at UC Berkeley said this is the most amazing breakthrough since relativity.
Right. So if you think about what is 8th space, we could even ask you that. If you had an 8th dimension, what do you think is there, John? Do you just imagine it? Let's get some dialogue going here.
Eighth space?
Or 8th dimensional space, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my interest is superstring theory, so I kind of look at the extra dimensions the way, Ed Witten and others in superstring theory do. I don't think anybody knows. I mean, it could be, each dimension could be extremely large, larger than our universe, or could be enfolded smallly within our space. I think that's an interesting question. So I have no idea. I mean,
I would say we don't agree with that little folding smallly into our space, because that also always puts us as the third dimension being on top, or the second dimension being on top. Yeah. But we actually feel maybe they're not bigger than us, but that they would be. It's almost like the duplicate on a what would be called a complex level, or working with higher levels of the third dimension and the fourth dimension. If you have the fourth dimension time working on a higher reality, you actually have what Einstein also kind of talked about, is all time was like a river, that it was all interconnected and flowed together. And so and that's where precognition also comes in, which is sometimes been used in remote viewing. In fact, Russell Targ did a study of the silver market. The University of Colorado, Boulder, did a fantastic study on the stock market, because they could precognize what was going to happen with the stocks. And they did 100%. Really, you can look at this on the internet. So how do you have that? Time has to be together. That does not ignore free will. But Elizabeth, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about
I have a question for Dr. Rosher, which I think the audience would be very interested, tied into her work. And maybe you've been asked this before, when you talk about non-locality and instantaneous and multi-dimensions. Do you think one of those dimensions, or spatial or temporal, could be the dimension of death, or past lives, or whatever, where our consciousness goes.
This is very interesting because when I started talking about remote viewing at Lawrence Berkeley, a lot of the physicists are kind of mechanists. So they associated that with dealing with life after death. Now, I don't pretend to explain what happens after you die. I'm just working before you die. And so what it is the reason 8 dimensions is chosen is it's the least number of dimensions that obeys what's called the Lorentz invariance. That is, if I do an experiment here now and someone in Russia does it next week, I'm likely to get the same result. So a spatial temporal invariance. And so the theory is constructed to fit with the main body of physics. And Lorentz invariance is important, but it also is the least number of dimensions that allows macroscopic non-locality as well as microscopic non-locality. So it fits with quantum mechanics and takes us out of shut up and calculate, and you may be involved in the result of your experiment. And also it explains the non-locality of consciousness. I don't pretend to tell you all about the nature of consciousness because frankly I don't know. But I do explain that within the context of physics, non-locality can be formulated for accommodating for remote viewing and other non-local macroscopic phenomena which may be discovered in astrophysics. Most of the people I did remote viewing, I've done over 100 experiments with excellent results, some at SRI and some with my Berkeley research group and some with the Fundamental Fysiks Group. They were basically secretary free for lunch. I'd take them out and give them an egg salad or tuna fish sandwich and then do a remote viewing. It was kind of like low pay, no pay job. And then like one of the best viewers at SRI was a guy that I knew at SRI, an engineer down the hall that was free for lunch and free to do a remote viewing. Turned out to be one of the best viewers.
At the same time, as Desiree and Elizabeth would also indicate through our mutual friends involving remote viewing throughout the world, I would say the vast majority do not subscribe to any particular theology or philosophy, but the whole idea of the open-endedness of consciousness would show that there is a quest for unification, a quest for compassion, a quest for going beyond dogma and the prescriptions that lock people up into mental boxes.
And let me just say, this is important for people to realize, even though a lot of people equate, we'll say ESP, or with channeling and things like that come from other entities. That's not what the remote viewers were connected with. Sure. Precognition is simply seeing into the future. Remote viewing is seeing into another space relationship on this planet that you can't see in this third dimensional box that we're living in. And so, it's really a matter of consciousness itself, being able to be and experience somewhere else, we'll say instantaneously. That's the non-locality. So I think that's really important. And I think Elizabeth has one of the few, we'll say, explanations mathematically for how this can work. And she does take it out of, a lot of people say, consciousness is a field. It can be anywhere on the planet, and we just tap into that. We're, the senders and the receivers. And in a sense, that's half truth. But she actually says, we are, and this is something that the Blue Brain Project in Switzerland is also saying, our mind can actually start working beyond the third or fourth dimension. We're actually calculating in a certain sense in these complex simplex, which are like tetrahedral geometries of the fifth, sixth, seventh. I think they're even saying, like string theorists, up to the 11th dimension. So we have that potential, and I think that's what's so exciting. And Elizabeth has the mathematics to show how this can work.
Yeah, that's what I love about her work that I've read, is that, as a physicist, I'm really a biophysicist. You prove your point. You demonstrate it with mathematics, and that's really the language of science and physics. And I have to ask you this question too. You wrote a book on the holographic universe, which is one of my main interests. Can you maybe do you believe the universe is a hologram or a holographic universe? Your take on that?
Oh, I would have to say, I think holography or a holographic universe, Carl Preben did a lot of work with that, with his work with macaque monkeys, and made a Fourier transform concept, and I've worked on a 5-dimensional Fourier transform. But as far as, I think the holographic concept is starting as a metaphor. I don't think Richard and I completely formulated what a hologram would mean in terms of mathematics, but we gave it a good start.
Richard Amoroso, who was the co-author of that book, and I think what we're feeling here is the fact that, the second dimension, we'll say, has similarities and connections to the third dimension, just as the third dimension has connections to the fourth and the fifth and the eighth dimension. So the hologram always makes it seem like one place is more powerful than the next place. And I think instead, right, we're seeing the link between all of them. In fact, it's almost like a whole family. You can't, or you can't cut off your arm and then think you have an arm, just as a projection. So it's all kind of connected, not so much holographically, which means, for many that it's just a projection from somewhere else.
I was going to say, I had worked on a 12-dimensional geometry I published with Sion Ramon in physics journals. And what Richard really does is also talk about his 12-dimensional geometry. So this is not an ordinary hologram where you look at a 2-dimensional ray projected into 3 dimensions, which is fascinating within itself. But this is like a multi-dimensional hologram that's either an 8 or a 12-dimensional hologram. So mathematically, it's quite different than an ordinary hologram.
Right. And if you just take the part that each part is part of every part, then we would say yes in that sense. And our work right now with the book that Dr. Hurtak's putting out is talking about the 8th dimension, the 12th dimension, and even there's a Leech lattice at the 24th dimension. And we feel that those areas are really the light energy areas that then come down and manifest the matter energy.
I just learned something from you, Dr. Rasher, because Rauscher, in my study of the holographic universe, it seems that, looking at it as a 2-dimensional hologram, if that was the case, the cosmic rays would all seem to originate from a single point in space, which they don't, and always be at the same latitude as the Earth rotated. But now when you talk about a multi-dimensional hologram, that could solve that problem. So you just gave me a great idea of something to look into that may resolve this conflict that I'm seeing in these equations.
Yeah, the book with Richard Amoroso was published by World Scientific, and 2009 was Richard. And then another book I published called Orbiting the Moons of Pluto, Solving Maxwell's, Einstein, Schrodinger, and the Dirac Equation in Complex A-Space. And that's a World Scientific 2011, and they're on Amazon.
And we would say we're looking at not only the 8th dimension, or more popularly called by some people studying now, the E8, but also we would, like as Elizabeth said, we would look even to the 12th dimension, to the 24th dimension, because we feel that that's really the better direction. We're kind of looking at it upside down by thinking it's only 2 to 3. So I'm glad you caught on to that. And that's all but we're all interconnected. It's kind of like the simulated universe. They always think that this is the simulation. Why does this have to be a simulation? This can be just as real as any other universe. If they're all interconnected, they can still have consciousness in others that affect and relate to down here, but it's not simulated in that sense.
It's interesting. I'm also, as you know, an archaeologist. I've worked with ancient Coptic and Greek and Egyptian documents, and the ancient Greek philosophers spoke of what they called the Agdoos, which is the 8th dimension. For them, that was the entry point to the higher worlds. And I think there's a correlation here, although we worked out more of the mathematics through Elizabeth. with the ancient concept that there is a ceiling to which you can go with the physical sciences and the sensory apparatus, but then there is a area that you have to transcend through what I would call imaginary space and a little different approach. And it's this higher approach or this consciousness unfoldment that's so exciting in the work that we share with so many in future science, is to push science ahead through consciousness.
And if you can think of the 8, I mean, you have the first 4 in the lower part of the 8 and the next 4 in the upper part of the 8, and it has this ongoing connection. And maybe there's even beyond the 8. So that's what.
Well, 8 is an infinity sign on it.
Yeah.
Been turned up this way.
Oh, Dr. Rasher, I wanted to say something too. What I admire you so much for, because also being in academia most of my life, like you say, we get laughed at when we talk about parapsychology, metaphysics, consciousness, and to stand up to your colleagues and promote this. And I know you must have gone through so much. I admire you for your stamina, your courage. You're really a pioneer. You're truly I admire you as one of the people that I hope makes a big impression on our future generation, our future students, to see here's a lady who has tried to unify multidisciplines that nobody else has because they're closed-minded. And when you said you're an open-minded skeptic, to me that says it all. You have to be open-minded. I always say dream, but dreams make great discoveries, but you have to find evidence, proof, and data. So I really thank you. You know, as a former retired professor myself, I think what you're doing is really encouraging a new generation of thinkers, a new generation. You're pushing the envelope of our scientific and paranormal research, and I'm just totally amazed. I'm definitely going to get all your books.
Well, have fun reading them because I had fun writing them. But I will say, it's a day and night project. If you don't keep after it 10 to 12 hours or 18 hours a day, my first book, I would do about 2 all-nighters a week. But I plan to retire in about 1,000 years. Because it's no fun to retire, and I might be tired sometimes, but I'm not retired. Busy as all get out.
So we stand at a very interesting time in history. Younger minds are beginning to realize the importance of consciousness.
Yes.
The old separation between Einstein's position, Bohr's position is being overcome. We're beginning to realize the micro and the macro are coming together, and consciousness is the hidden variable for quantum transitions. We see great excitement, and in our work with Elizabeth, remote viewing, we've opened up the findings of new archaeological discoveries. We've been able to work with cultural understandings of people of different traditions. We've been able to reach out to a new astronomy, cosmology, and recognize we're in a multi-dimensional universe. We're also recognizing that there are other cosmic frontiers of intelligence that are using consciousness to connect with us. So there's a whole new, shall we say, roadmap ahead of us. And Elizabeth, you're part of that.
Oh, Professor Rasher, you built your own telescope, but you got to tell me, you had to have your own chemistry set as a kid too, right?
I did. What my sister did is she found a wonderful man. She got married, and she was older, and she moved out and left me a dressing room. And the dressing room rapidly became a chem lab. And I built my telescopes there. I had a full chem lab. I actually made a fundamental discovery I never published on chemistry with oxalic acid and potassium permanganate. And then I started building rockets, but I thought, I'll set them off electronically. I'm not going to get blown up. So I had my mom take me to electronics school in high school, and so that's where I learned electronics. And then later I married my second husband, and he did rockets and telescopes, but he set his off manually and blew up his arm. So I was right about the approach, but I got to college and there was no time to build rockets.
So we were at an amazing time. of all of this coming together on our series with Dr. John, and our concept of the mysteries of the universe continues. Those of you who are interested, again, you can get this book on Amazon, Mind Dynamics in Space and Time. And I just wanted to thank you, John, for bringing us together as we continue our series of mysteries in the universe, as we push the envelope, as we begin to bring together the many disciplines and also the great cultures of the world. We realize we're all in this together. We realize that we are on spaceship Mother Earth, and we are about to enter the most dynamic and wonderful phase of recognizing we are not alone in the universe. At the same time, we have the traditional baggage of all of the poor planning and economics, environmental change, et cetera, that's going to be big problems for us unless we raise our consciousness to see solutions.
And let us realize also that although you're in another location, which is why you're on Zoom with us, and we're here, we're really interconnected. And it's the shortest distance is really in that space of non-locality that we are as one.
I really wanted to thank a special guest, Dr. Elizabeth Rasher. And all you have to do, the listeners, is just Google her name, and you will be so impressed. This lady is really amazing. She is a pioneer, and I can't tell you how honored I am to have you as our guest. And I've actually learned a tremendous amount from you, even in this short interview. And your books, your papers are just fantastic. And I wanted to say I wish you the best and continue to inspire people. You inspire me. And what more can I say? Thank you for being our special guest.
And I'd like to leave all of you with a proverb. If you can't be a hippie, be a happy. In other words, have the happiness of life within your hearts. See the love of the universe and the divine spark always at work within your mind. And also realize the great compassion that unites all of us on this greater journey.
And I just like to give Elizabeth's website anyway, which is elizabethrauscher.org, and our website, which is futurescience.org and keysofenoch.org. And yours, John?
Giza Pyramid. Well, listen, Dr. Hurtak, Dr. J.J. Hurtak, and Dr. Desiree Hurtak, I want to tell you it's an honor that all of us are co-hosts in this wonderful Mysteries of the Universe series. The feedback I'm getting is tremendous. We're getting thousands and thousands of viewers to our shows. But I want to especially thank the listeners, the people who watch our show, who send us the great feedback. To continue, we'll be having many more wonderful shows like this with special guests. But I have to say, today was kind of the highlight of our series, having Dr. Rosher. And again, I thank you and wish you all. And until next time, many blessings to all of you.
Peace to all of you, and keep your eyes on the stars and your heart with humanity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.